Hey, and welcome back to the Victory Podcast. I am here with this guy. First of all, let me start with this. A lot of people may not know who I am. I mean,
right.
I've been kind of camped out in the kids' building since last May. So I am Lori LaFleur, married to Pastor Jody. And this guy is my brother-in-law.
We are in-laws. That's
We
right.
are in-laws.
For a while now.
That's it. So Pastor Rick, this is going to be fun.
I would hope so.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah. So you and I have recently been talking about the subject of restoration.
That's right.
And gosh, that's kind of a big word. Can I just be honest with you? When I hear the word restoration, I think of furniture because I'm thinking of where are all my HGTV fans out there?
And see, I'm a car guy, so
Okay.
I love car restoration shows. And so
Got it.
I get
So
it. I get
we're
it.
kind of on the
That's how I
same
do.
page.
We're on
Yeah.
the same page.
So thinking of the word restoration, again, thinking furniture, redoing furniture, cars, taking something that was old, maybe even forgotten about for a second.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that you're old. Did you
Let's
take it?
appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank
but
you.
taking something that needs some TLC.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
bringing it forward and making it all that it can be. That's what I think about when I think of the word restoration. So
Yeah, in our conversations have revolved around. It's still new for me to be back, and I don't want to make a big thing of that. But it's a major shift in my life, and it is a signifier of the restorative work that God's done in my life. And I was telling somebody earlier, I'm like, the one character trait, I guess, of Victory that I'm very, very proud of, by the way. Is the authenticity of the people on staff here. There's not a lot of presumption. There's not a lot of playing a role here. If you come in Monday through Thursday, the amount of dress sweats that I see, I was a little shocked by when I came back. I'm a jeans guy, but it's casual. But the dressy sweats, that people
I
wear,
like to call that a lounge suit.
there we go, a lounge wear, church lounge wear.
Yes.
But it's kind of a I guess a little symbol that shows that we're a very casual church,
Yeah,
very
yeah.
very open and honest about things, and so we tend to share a little bit about our lives and where we come from. And I know for me, restoration has been a big deal, and it's kind of been my message for the last couple of years, I guess, because in my life I went through so much that I was not expecting.
Sure.
And I'm always kind of taking a look at that and going, okay, where are we at in this process and what's going on? And everybody does that in their own lives, I guess. And so I'm interested in that word these days and kind of watching. I think I'm probably at the end stages of one of the major restorative
We'll go
works,
with it.
yeah, that God has done in my life. No doubt, there's other times where we go
Sure.
through that, but for me, it's kind of been
Yeah.
a big one over the last 10, 11 years, So anyway, it's a big.
So moving from that topic, that thought, I would say forward, Rick, I just have to tell you, because again, first of all, I feel honored to do this with you just because Jody and I did walk so closely with you
Yeah.
through some really tough seasons. And even thinking about it earlier today, I saw you, again in the, can I just say the lowest part of the valley?
Yeah.
And it was tough because we care about you so deeply, and of course, the family and all that. But seeing you walk through that, physically, I don't really hardly know anybody who's walked through a hard season that did not lose appetite. Just drop down to
Yeah.
a very
It
small.
has physical signs as well as spiritual and mental. And
Walking with you through a really, really hard season, would you say it felt crushing? I mean,
Oh,
just
without a
seeing
doubt,
you,
yeah.
seeing you that, but fast forward,
Yeah.
what were the steps, would you say, that took you from that deepest, darkest place that you had ever been in your entire life? Here you are, a PK, right? And you were the fun PK. Shh, don't tell. Yeah, but
Anybody knows Jody knows that. It's not a secret. Yeah.
but really, everyone knows you as the fun guy. So knowing that of you, that you're one of your greatest joys was, bringing joy to others, and so seeing you in such a really tough place, and then forward. What were some of the steps that God?
So, but I guess before I even say too much about that, there's a tendency to make a big deal out of what I go through or whatever, but I only mean it in the sense that it has made me so much more aware of what people go through. If you have an easy life, I'm an Office fan. I like watching The Office, and when Andy Bernard, the character on there, says, talks about going through a hard thing. He said, I have not had a very hard life. And so it was a bit of a shock to his
Yeah.
system. And that's kind of how I was, I guess. I mean, I was used to things going
Sure,
well.
sure.
And I come from a family that is healthy and whole, and things went well. And so
Yeah.
to find myself in a tough spot was a
Right.
little bit of a shocker.
Yeah, yeah.
And it wasn't something I planned on or hoped for. But there are people who go through that every day, all day. I mean, and so it just makes us one of people,
It
I guess,
does.
and so
It does.
it really gives me a little bit of empathy and sympathy for people who
Yeah.
walk through things that are
Right.
harder than maybe you and I
Yeah.
have walked through.
Yeah.
But boy, it makes it easier to have those conversations
Sure.
for sure.
Yeah.
But I know probably something common to most people, when you go through something that is difficult, you respond in a couple of different ways. As a believer, the way you should respond to something like that is you go to your dad. I mean, you go to, and I don't mean my physical dad, I mean my spiritual
Absolutely.
father. You fall back on that relationship with God, and there's a tendency to almost feel a little bad about this. I think I said this in the last podcast we did, but there's a tendency to feel bad about that, like it's wrong to maybe depend on God. But what I learned is he's a life raft. I mean, he expects that. He's not shocked by anything we go
Right.
through. It doesn't catch him by surprise.
Yeah.
He knew it was going to happen before it ever happened. So to fall back on him, and so in my relationship with God, I had been saved long enough and mature enough to know. Number one, it wasn't his doing. Number two, he's going to walk me through
He's
it.
gonna walk you through it.
And there was I was able to hold on to, there is something on the other side of this. Now, it seems a million miles away, and the one thing I will say is it was cloudy. Let's say, I mean, you have no idea what it looks
Yeah.
like or what
Yeah.
it's going to be. But if you trust God, then you know somehow, some way, at some point, I'm going to come out of this, and there will be something different. I did things like lean on people. People. I guess not everybody would realize this, but I've loved you as my sister-in-law forever, but during that time, I could not have been more thankful because I literally called her every single day. Every single day for months I called.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
wasn't, hey, how's it going?
Right.
It was blah. I mean,
You
just
were
throw up
throwing
on
out
the phone.
lifelines.
Oh gosh.
And I knew that's what you were
Yeah.
doing. And really and truly,
Yeah.
Rick, I mean, Joe and I walking with you in that season, phone would ring and Jody would go, is it Rick again? And I'd say, it is. That is your brother. And I am getting the phone. And he would be like, yeah. And he, of course, he cares about you deeply.
Yeah.
And he was like, hey, absolutely. And there were times, but I want to ask you this while you're in the middle of that. Even though you had lifelines, you had, different
Right.
friends, myself, family, did you still feel like there was a pocket in a moment where you felt completely isolated, alone, and almost forgotten about? Were there moments and pockets of your day in this season that you were just like, I've never felt more alone in my whole life?
Yes, absolutely. And I because at some point you're not on the phone with somebody. You're not, now I didn't feel isolated from God, but I felt like the way I explained it to people is I felt like I was treading water for 2 years,
Right.
just treading water. And that is a horrible feeling because I couldn't find ground. I
Yeah.
couldn't find
You're in
somewhere to
survivor
stand.
mode.
Yeah, and
You're
so I'm
just
in
trying to make it
survival
through.
mode.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to say I just called you every day, but there was like a list of people that I called every day to fill the minutes because I
Absolutely.
was just
Absolutely.
grabbing for some sort of connection. Now, fortunately, I had plenty people around me. I mean, there was, I have a community of people that I love and love me, and
Yeah.
and most people do. And so I think while there's no doubt it was a burden, and you probably wouldn't admit it, but it's a burden in the sense that here we go. Rick's going to talk to me for 45 minutes or an hour and just vomit emotions. But when between those times when I was by myself, it was.
Yeah.
It was a little bit lonely.
Yeah.
And so I spent an inordinate amount of time with God, and
Yeah.
the rest of the time reaching out to people just to feel connected. And so, fortunately, we made it through. It was a tough
Yeah.
thing to go through,
yeah,
but
yeah.
to get past that, when we talk about restoration, at that point during the middle of that, what you're doing is looking for an ending somewhere, and for God to bring things about. And so, bring things back, and that was the hard part, was that waiting period, waiting period to get there. I trusted God, but waiting to get to that
But
point.
would
so.
you say daily for someone listening who is in what they feel like is shambles? Like they feel
Oh,
like
yeah.
they are that piece of furniture, that car that's been shoved out by the road, and it may or may not ever recover. Because you and I talked about this earlier, that there were times that you thought, will I fully ever recover? Like, has everything I built
Yeah. Okay.
been
Yeah, that's a good
lost?
point. That's a good point because it's funny. There was a little bit of. I guess I didn't connect the two. I felt like there was going to be an end and things were going to be better, but I still held on to a thought that, like you just said, everything I've done up till now is just crumbled up, thrown away. I mean, I really felt that. I felt like a hypocrite. I felt like I had spent all this energy doing these things
Wow.
and none of it mattered anymore. And that was a terrible feeling because, I mean, I was 49 years old.
Sure.
And so to look at everything you've built and think it's garbage is a tough spot. So I'm glad you brought that up. But in that process, I knew God was going to do something better on the other side, but then it's just the waiting.
The waiting.
So, but something happened during that time, and I told you about this. I had a dream during that time, and I'm spending time with God, and I'm like, God, I'm hoping for something better.
Yes.
I'm reading Job, and I'm like, I'm Job, I'm going through all this.
And it's not funny. I'm
no.
only laughing because those of us who have been through dark, tough valleys,
That's right.
You in that moment, you're like, this book was written for me.
That's
And
exactly
you
right.
probably never more identified with him in your life than
Without
you
a
did.
doubt.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
So you tend to to see him as your, I don't know, you're the stand-in for Job, right? You see yourself
Yeah.
in that story. And so I definitely felt that way. But when you look at the end, things worked out for him. And I guess I didn't understand the full redemptive process that God was going to. First of all, it was garbage that all that was going to be thrown away. God doesn't do that. I mean,
right.
He certainly doesn't allow that to happen. If you're plugged in and going where you need to be, God's going to make something of
Absolutely.
that. But I had this dream during the middle of that time. And it was kind of I'll just briefly go into it. I was running and doing triathlon at the time. And so in my dream, I'm having this race. I'm right at the end of a race. And weirdly, it was in a business setting, cubicles everywhere. It's in an office complex, which is weird. And at the end of the race, I just remember knowing I finished in the top 3. And then I just remember my hand being open and these 3 coins fell into my hand. And I thought, that's weird, but it felt very spiritual, felt very prophetic-like. And so I'm talking to my dad about it, and I'm saying, this is what happened, and, I don't know what to think of that and all. And he said, my dad's full of the Holy Spirit, and so I think he heard from God and said, Rick, I feel like God's saying that there's going to be some things restored to you, that there are 3 things. He said, if I had to ask you, what are 3 things that you feel like have been stolen during this time? It popped that quickly in my head.
Wow.
Marriage, money, and ministry.
Come on.
Because all 3 of those were lost in that season. And so that was an eye-opener. So I had something to hang on to. And so I think when somebody's going through that process, to understand, first of all, as long as you understand God's a restorer.
Yeah.
And secondly, there is some little nugget that the Holy Spirit throws out there that says, look, I've got something for you that kind of allows you to grab
Wow.
onto it in faith and go forward.
Yeah.
So I kind of clung on to that.
That was almost like your life raft.
It was
And it kept you
absolutely.
afloat.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And
Wow.
so fast forward a little bit, a couple of years later, 2 years after all that, I re-meet my wife, Tracy, who was my childhood sweetheart,
Yeah.
first real girlfriend, loved her, met her here. We dated for years. Little, what I thought was, first love sort of thing. And we reconnect. And at 49 years old, I knew where I was going. I wasn't playing around. So 10 weeks, start to finish,
Yeah.
we were dating and then married. And I remember going back to that dream and thinking, okay, God, this is part of that restorative process that you do, that restoration. And so, and I found myself in a marriage that felt like restoration.
Wow.
And
What a
through this
gift.
process, when I left Victory, it was a weird spot. I had been a pastor for a long time, and I told this story in the earlier podcast. Didn't know what that was going to look like. What am I qualified to do? Feel like you could do anything, but don't know if everybody would agree with that. And so God immediately provided a job. One interview done in a job that quite honestly paid a lot more than ministry did. And so God restored that part of it. The last link in the chain was coming back to Victory. And so that was an incredible moment for me that felt full circle.
Come on.
And I think maybe the most pleasant thing about it has been the way that people have responded to me coming back. And it's been a couple of months now, and I love it. I'm still getting used to being back, but love it, and
Man, that's
I'm
awesome.
feeling so fulfilled.
That is awesome.
And so anyway, I'm talking a whole bunch, but
So
but
encouraging, Rick.
yeah,
It is.
that's kind of how it all looked. And I guess I would say that when we look at that in our personal lives, not just me, but anybody who's dealing with loss in some way, you have to know that God's a restorer. I mean, I was listening to the podcast with Jody and Nakota.
Yeah.
And Nakota made the comment that that God's desire was to restore relationship and intimacy with us. And I've always said this about the Bible. If you look at the Bible in totality, what you see at the very beginning is God wanted to have kids. He has kids. That relationship is broken. And the rest of the Bible is all about his pursuit or that restoration of that relationship with
That's
the people that he
awesome.
loves.
I
And
love
so
that.
you can't possibly miss the
Yeah.
fact that God
Yeah.
is a restorer. Why wouldn't he do it on a micro level
Man,
with
that's
us
incredible.
individually? So
Well, and what I heard you say, Rick, all throughout, just as we've been talking, is three different things stood out to me. The first one is you leaned into the Lord first and foremost. I mean, you
Absolutely.
went straight to Abba Father. I mean, you also went to your earthly dad.
that's right.
But you did and we knew that. I mean, regularly you would tell us every morning. You told me, Lori, I get up, I get my coffee, I go to my swing, right, and
that's
it
right.
overlooked your pasture. And you said I would spend sometimes hours there seeking the
Yeah.
Lord. So I heard you say that. Secondly, you reached out to people. You have a tribe of people, and you're like, they're safe. They're going to love me no matter what. They're going to be my biggest cheerleaders. And you reached out to people, and then thirdly, you leaned in for, I'm going to say, a supernatural sign. You didn't just pray and ask God for help, but you were like, Lord, show me what is my next step. And man, it's awesome that God gave
I
you.
think you could probably preach this. That was a
Oh, my bad.
a better outline. No, seriously, that was a great outline at that. I didn't think about that as I was
Well,
saying
I'm just
it, but yeah.
thinking of how to practically apply this and thinking about how kind is the Lord that He gave you. You said a dream or a vision?
A dream.
A
It was
dream.
a dream, yeah.
A dream that you saw it so vividly, though. I mean, the three coins and the three coins represented what were they?
Marriage, money, and ministry. Yeah.
And at the end, I mean, when you were walking through the process that I would say would be the hardest, where you just felt like, I don't know if I'll ever come out of this. Those are the three that probably concerned you the very most, weren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah, like I said, when Dad asked me, what do you feel like has been stolen? Bam, 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 those things. And I had not thought about it. I mean, it's just what came out at that moment. So it was so clearly what was front of mind,
Come on.
that,
Man,
that
that's so
had
encouraging.
been stolen. And I think when we go through that, when we have some sort of loss, something difficult that we go through, we probably know what was taken. We see the damage that was done, and it's hard to maybe see beyond that. But understanding God's restore, and you just laid out the process, leaning into God, leaning into your community or the people around you for support, and then getting a sign from God about it is a good process to go through. That's good. I mean, I'm telling you, you did great
Well, thank
outlining
you. I
that.
appreciate that.
But that's kind of the process. But at the end of it, what ends up happening is you're better off than you were before.
Come on.
And so when that loss happens, I mean, I said this earlier, but God's never surprised by this stuff.
not.
He sees it from beginning to end before it's happened. And so his plan, as long as we are locked into him and his plan is always, you're going to see this happen. It's okay. Trust me.
Yeah.
And I've got something better on the other side of that. And so I no doubt have, found myself at the end of it in a better spot than I was before. And there are some lessons that come with scars, some things you learn that are able to be passed down to other people.
That's
They're
so good.
teachable things.
That's so good.
And so, fortunately, I was in a frame of mind where I was paying attention to that process so that I would know what it looked like, and that's able to be shared down the line. But I told you this story when you and Jody came and approached Tracy and I and said, "Look, have you thought about maybe coming back?" There was a process I went through. Said, "Hey, let me pray about this," and my heart immediately says yes.
Sure.
But there's some logistics that come into play there. And this is what's great. In fact, I was telling Brady a while ago. I don't. The way I hear from God is a little different. I wish that I could hear, "Thus saith the Lord," da, 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 and it's all lined out. It does
Easy
not
peasy.
happen that way for
Yeah.
me. It's never happened like that for me. My wife can hear from God. Says, "I'm getting a word from God." She'll go sit down and write 3 pages,
Yep,
and
yep.
I'm like, "How in the world does that happen?" Anyway, I just don't hear like that. But what it does happen is that I tend to hear from God in a way that allows me to be led easily, but I don't go, "Here's what God said." But in this particular instance, as I was praying about coming back to Victory, I was on the back porch and I had some concerns because there's some issues that come up with that, and I felt like God gave me 4 P's, bam, 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 right there. And again, not the way I hear from God, so I was like, okay, it's got to be the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And those were promise, preparation, provision, and purpose.
Wow.
And I don't write sermons good enough to to
make
write all
it
that
rhyme
down
and
like
do
that.
all
Yeah.
that, yeah.
But and number one was the fact that God promised to me that He was going to restore everything that was lost. I had that dream, and I know God as a restorer. Yes, God's like, here's the promise. Here's what's out there for you. Then comes the part that's not fun for us, and that's the preparation part. And I went through a lot of that, getting my emotions under control, learning how to forgive and walk without bitterness,
That's so good,
and
Rick. So good.
and to not care about those things and just see what God has for you through that. And there's a ton of preparation that goes into it. And so we need to recognize God will give the promise, and then He says, okay, now I'm going to prep you to be able to work in it and walk in it. And then thirdly, that if God has promised something and He's preparing you, He's going to provide for it.
Absolutely.
Coming here, that was one of my concerns. Okay, God, is there room for me here? Anyway, God then said, look, I'm going to provide. I'm your provision. Don't worry about anything else. And then lastly is walking in that purpose. And that's the fun part.
Man,
that's when
that's
you
awesome.
get past it. Doesn't mean everything's,
Roses.
peachy keen after that. Yeah. But it means you've been through the difficult part and now walk in the purpose. And I didn't feel like I was, in my last job, I enjoyed it. And it was a godsend. But I wasn't walking in my purpose, what I was
understand.
born to do.
Yeah.
And this allowed us to get to
Man,
that
that
part.
is
So,
awesome.
anyway,
That is so encouraging.
that's it in a nutshell.
Man, Rick. Well, I think that's powerful, and it's
Thank
really encouraging. And again, just while you were talking, I thought of the verse, God does work all things out together for the good.
That's
To
right.
those that are called according to His purpose. And you just said the word purpose. And so it made me think of that all along, even through the hard, the bad, the excruciatingly painful, right?
Yeah.
Because there were times, even still, you're like, God, somehow I have hope that you can return
That's
and
right.
you can restore every single thing that was lost, and you can restore.
Got to see
And
Him
Rick,
as that. Yeah,
that you're looking back, and you're like, Lord, you made it better,
that's right.
and that there are probably so many things that you thought, Lord, would you ever, if ever you could make this just even a little bit whole, and
Yeah.
and have you been pleasantly surprised?
It has been
Really about the
absolutely
kindness of
incredible.
the Lord. I mean, because
Absolutely.
over and over, in my own life, hearing your story, and then walking in my own personal journey, I continually am reminded that God truly is the kindest person that I know.
Absolutely.
And He cares about us so deeply, and His heart is to restore
That's
us
right.
back
That's
to
the
even
end
better.
of it. Yeah, I mean, if you know anything about God, that's the goal. Is He has got something better for you on the other side of it. You just have to trust Him. You just have to let Him do the work. Be open to it, and He walks you through it. And there's something better on the other side of it.
That's good, bro.
Period. Punctuation.
Hey,
There
love
we
you,
go.
bro.
That was very Rick and Lori like. Yeah,
Yes, it was. Quirky and awkward, not you, me.
that's right.